You know, sometimes I think about how quiet the world used to be. Not quiet in the way we imagine, but quiet in a different sense. The kind of quiet that comes after the wind stops moving through the grass. When you can hear your own heart, and you're not sure if the sound behind you is the wind or something breathing. That was the kind of silence early humans lived in. It wasn't peaceful, not really. It was waiting. The land was always waiting for something to happen. And for our ancestors, the ones who didn't yet have the fire or the walls or even much in the way of tools, there was always something watching them back. Long before we became the hunters, we were the hunted. Tiny bands of fragile, hairless beings scattered across the open plains. No claws, no fangs, no real armour. Just skin and bone and fear, and this strange, restless mind that never stopped thinking. The world was full of predators, every shape and size. There were lions much bigger than the ones today, hyenas the size of small bears, tigers with teeth curved like knives, crocodiles that could wait underwater for hours, and all of them saw us not as equals, but as meat. At night, when the darkness pressed in, early humans would huddle close together, not because they loved warmth, but because of what lived beyond the edge of that warmth. You could hear them out there sometimes. The low rumble of a lion's throat, the cracking of a branch, a splash in the reeds. They didn't always attack. Sometimes they just circled, watching, testing. We often imagine early humans as brave, but I think bravery wasn't really what they had. It was more like constant awareness, a kind of quiet panic that never left. They learned to listen differently than we do now. A single rustle in the grass could mean the difference between another sunrise or being gone by morning, and that's how it all began. The long, slow story of how we faced the world's most dangerous predators, and somehow learned to live among them. The first real danger probably came from big cats. Lions, leopards, and their older, heavier cousins, the saber-toothed cats. They ruled the grasslands long before we arrived. Their world was one of ambush and silence. They didn't chase like wolves did. They waited, perfectly still. Muscles like coiled springs. One leap, one mistake, and that was it. There are old fossils showing the marks of those teeth on early human bones. Deep punctures in the skull, claw marks across ribs. Sometimes whole family groups, wiped out in a single night. It's strange to think of it. Our ancestors sitting by a dying fire, listening to the darkness breathe. And yet somehow we survived. Not because we were stronger, but because we began to think like them. We started to watch the watchers. We learned their habits, when they hunted, where they drank, how they moved when they were full and when they were hungry. And in doing that, little by little, we started to see the world not as prey, but as something we could predict. It must have taken thousands of years to build that understanding, to turn fear into awareness, to turn panic into pattern. That's what made us dangerous in the end. Not teeth, not claws, but memory. Still, back then, there were many nights when memory wasn't enough, when the fire burned out too soon, or the sentry fell asleep, and the dark came alive again. The hyenas were the worst for that. People often think of them as scavengers, but ancient hyenas were something else. Stronger, smarter, faster. They hunted in packs, and they could crush bone with their jaws. They didn't fear the fire the way lions did. Sometimes they came right into camp bold as shadows. It's said that their laughter, that strange, eerie sound, was one of the first noises humans learned to truly fear, because by the time you heard it, it was already too late. You can imagine it, can't you? The dry grass under the moonlight, the shapes moving low to the ground, the eyes shining at the edge of the firelight, the sound of footsteps around you, the smell of wet fur and dust. Someone whispers, someone coughs, and then everything happens too fast to remember clearly. A scream, a snarl, then silence again. And yet the next morning, the ones who lived gathered the ashes, sharpened their stones, and moved on. Always moving, always learning. Maybe that's what survival really was. Not winning, just moving forward. There's a strange thing that happens when you live your life in fear of something. You start to understand it. I think that's what happened with those first humans. The lions and hyenas didn't just haunt them, they taught them. The way the predators moved at dusk, the way the wind shifted before an ambush, the way vultures circled when something had died nearby. Every sign meant something. Every silence meant something too. They didn't have words for it yet, not really. But they had feelings that worked like words. A kind of ancient grammar of danger. The crack of a twig meant freeze. The smell of blood meant leave now. And sometimes, when they found bones scattered in the grass, they read them like maps. Lessons written in the remains of others. The big cats were not alone out there. There were bears too, heavy and patient. In Europe there were cave bears. Enormous things, taller than any man when they stood up. Some early humans might have shared caves with them, at least until one side decided it wasn't worth the risk. You can almost picture it. A dim cave mouth, half lit by a little fire, and somewhere deeper inside, the slow breathing of something that could end your life with a single blow. And the humans would listen, hearts thudding, wondering if the bear knew they were there. Sometimes the caves told stories of coexistence, scratch marks high on the walls, paintings made later by human hands, almost as if to say, we both lived here once. Maybe there was some respect in that. Fear? Yes, but also a strange recognition. They were not so different in their needs. Both wanted warmth, both wanted food, both wanted their young to live. Further south, near the rivers and swamps, there were crocodiles. They were like living reminders of another age, patient, ancient, and merciless. A crocodile could wait for hours, its eyes barely above the water, until some thirsty creature bent down to drink. Early humans learned the hard way that not all danger came with sound. Some of it came with stillness. They began to watch the water differently, to drink upstream where the current was fast, to throw sticks in before stepping closer. Small tricks that saved lives. And then there were snakes. Some of them so large they could kill by squeezing. Others small enough to hide in the sand. You didn't always see them. Sometimes you only heard the rustle or felt the sting, and then the heat spreading through your veins. There were no medicines, no antidotes, only luck and time. But humans began to notice patterns. The way certain birds screamed when snakes were near, the way a bitten animal staggered before falling. They learned from everything. It's easy for us to think that life back then was just chaos and fear, but I don't think it was. I think it had rhythm, a rhythm made of light and shadow, hunger and rest, danger and safety. Every day was a kind of conversation with the land and with the things that lived on it. Sometimes, when the nights were long and the predators quiet, early humans would look up at the stars, though they probably didn't have words for stars either. Just little fires in the black sky. Maybe they wondered if there was something watching them from up there too. Something bigger, but maybe kinder than what was waiting in the grass. Over thousands of years they started to change. Not their bodies at first, but their habits. They began to use fire more often and to carry it with them. Fire changed everything. Predators feared it. Even lions and hyenas kept their distance when they saw that strange, flickering light. For the first time, humans had a circle of safety. Imagine that feeling, sitting by a fire knowing that just beyond its glow are eyes that dare not come closer. The crackling sound, the warmth on your skin, the smell of burning wood. Maybe that was the first real peace they ever knew. But peace was never perfect. Fire could go out, rain could fall, wind could scatter the sparks, and when the fire died, so did the illusion of control. So they learned to keep it alive, to feed it like a living thing. In a way, the fire became their first pet, their first weapon, and their first comfort. With time, they made better tools, sharper stones, longer spears. They learned to hunt in groups, the same way predators did. Some of them even began to follow the herds, learning the movements of animals not just as prey, but as neighbours. It's almost poetic that the same minds that once feared the roar of lions began to mimic the strategies of those lions. Surround, wait, strike. We were learning to think like predators, not because we wanted to, but because the world demanded it. And still, there were dangers that no tool could stop. The storms, the floods, the diseases carried by insects. Nature didn't need fangs to remind us how small we were. But maybe the most dangerous times were the in-between ones, the moments when everything seemed calm. Because calm could be a trick, a sudden shadow, a single mistake, and everything you'd built could vanish. Some of the old stories, the ones whispered much, much later, talk about spirits and monsters. I think those were memories passed down from this time, memories of real predators that became symbols. The snake became temptation, the lion became pride, the hyena became laughter in the dark. Even when the actual creatures faded, the fear they inspired stayed. Sometimes I think about the mothers back then, sitting beside their sleeping children, listening for sounds in the grass. The smallest noise could turn the heart to stone. The instinct to protect must have been overwhelming. And maybe that's when love became something more than just instinct. Because to love something in a world that dangerous meant to fight against nature itself. Over time, something started to shift. It didn't happen all at once, of course. It never does. Change comes slowly, like mist rolling across the valley. You don't see it move, but when you look again, everything's different. The hunters had always been watching us, but now we began watching them differently. Not with fear, but with a kind of curiosity. Humans began to notice things. Small details like how a lioness used the wind when she hunted, or how wolves worked together without words. Maybe someone thought, what if we could do that too? And so, the prey began to learn the language of the hunters. It must have been strange, that first moment when a group of humans realized they could surround an animal the same way the lions did. They probably failed many times at first. Spears breaking, people getting hurt or worse. But they learned, slowly. The same way they'd learned to keep fire alive, they learned to move together. It's almost as if fear became their teacher. Every close call, every narrow escape was a kind of lesson. You see, humans had something none of the predators did. Not strength, not speed, but imagination. They could picture something that hadn't happened yet, like a lion in the grass, or a spear hitting a target. That little flicker of imagination changed everything, and once they began to use it, the balance started to tilt. Now, the nights weren't just about hiding, they became times of planning. People sat around fires, carving stones, whispering ideas. Maybe one said, if we dig a hole here, the animal will fall in. Another said, if we wait by the river, we can trap it. They were inventing stories before they even knew what stories were, and you can almost feel the pride in that. The first successful hunt must have felt like magic, like the world itself had finally listened. But even then, the danger never disappeared. A lion could still come in the night. A crocodile could still take someone's leg. A bear could still smash through everything they thought was safe. Humans didn't stop fearing the predators. They just started to understand that fear could be used. It's strange, isn't it? That the same feeling that used to make us run would later make us plan, build, and dream. There's something deeply human in that. The way we turn weakness into strength, or fear into creativity. Sometimes I think that's what evolution really is. Not the strong eating the weak, but the frightened learning how not to be eaten. In the early days, before the bow, before the traps and the walls, the spear was everything. A sharp point of stone tied to a stick. Simple, but powerful. It meant distance. You didn't have to get close anymore. That changed the rules. Predators that once saw humans as easy prey began to hesitate. They started to see the fire, the movement, the shouting, and maybe they thought twice. And that hesitation, that tiny flicker of doubt, might have saved more lives than any weapon. Still, the old instincts didn't disappear. Humans stayed cautious, always alert. Even as they learned to hunt, they never stopped glancing over their shoulders, because deep down they remembered what it meant to be hunted. That memory stayed with us. It still does. You can see it in the way people jump at shadows or flinch at sudden sounds. Somewhere inside, a part of us still lives on those plains, still listening for something moving in the dark. It's written into our bones, into the oldest part of our brains, the ones that don't care about logic, only survival. I sometimes wonder if that's why we tell scary stories. Not to frighten ourselves, but to keep that ancient awareness alive. Because once, forgetting fear could mean death. As humans spread out across grasslands, forests, deserts, they met new predators. In the north, there were wolves. In the jungles, leopards and tigers. On islands, giant lizards and eagles large enough to carry off a child. Each place had its own kind of danger, and humans adapted again and again. Some learned to climb trees at night. Others built fences of thorns or stacked stones around their camps. Some even began to befriend the smaller hunters, wild dogs, perhaps wolves at first, who stayed close for scraps and warmth. In exchange, those dogs barked when danger came. It's a simple thing, but maybe that was one of the biggest turning points in all of history. For the first time, humans didn't face the night alone. I imagine that moment often, a fire burning low, a few people half asleep, the sounds of the forest just beyond reach, and a small animal, a dog or something like it, lifting its head at a sound, growling softly, not out of hunger, but out of loyalty. Maybe the humans looked up, saw the dog's ears twitch, and knew they were safe, at least for now. Partnerships like that don't start from dominance. They start from shared fear. Two species, both wary, finding comfort in each other's company. And that's how humans began to shift the balance of power, not through war, but through friendship. A friendship born in fear. As centuries passed, people became better at reading the land. They could tell when predators had passed just by looking at tracks. They could smell danger before seeing it. They learned to use smoke, sound, and numbers to protect themselves. Predators began to notice too. They started to avoid certain places, certain smells. Humans were no longer the easiest meal. There were other things to hunt, easier things. And so, little by little, the circle of fear that had once surrounded humans began to fade. But the world didn't stop being dangerous. Even when lions and leopards weren't close by, new kinds of threats took their place. Insects that carried death, water that hid crocodiles, even other groups of humans who might fight over food or fire. The idea of predator started to change shape. Still, the lessons from those early predators never left us. They shaped how we built our shelters, raised off the ground close to each other. They shaped how we told time, day for work, night for safety. They shaped how we looked at the world, always scanning for patterns, for signs. Even now, thousands of generations later, when most of us sleep behind locked doors, that same old instinct hums quietly in the background. The need to check, to listen, to keep a small light burning somewhere. And sometimes, when you wake in the middle of the night for no reason, maybe it's not for no reason at all. Maybe it's that ancient part of you, still remembering what it felt like when eyes were watching from the dark. But the strange thing about that old fear is, it made us human. It taught us to think ahead, to care for each other, to imagine better ways to live. Without fear, maybe we'd never have invented anything at all. After a while, maybe a few thousand years, maybe more, the fear started to turn into something else. Not pride, not yet, but a kind of understanding. People began to realize they could read the world almost the way you read a person's face. A broken branch, a tuft of fur, a certain smell on the wind. It all spoke. They weren't guessing anymore. They knew. And that knowing changed everything. Because when you can predict danger, you start to control it. And once you can control it, you stop being the prey. It didn't happen overnight, though. Sometimes the lions still came. Sometimes the hyenas circled too close. But more often than not, the people were ready. They had the fire, they had the spears, they had each other. And for the first time in the long history of the world, the hunters hesitated. I like to picture one of those moments. The grass bending in the dark, a lion creeping low, its tail twitching, golden eyes bright with hunger, and then a sound the lion had never heard before, voices rising together, sharp stones flashing in the firelight, the smell of smoke, the sting of thrown embers. The lion backs away, confused, almost insulted. The meal had shouted back. That was the beginning of something very new on this planet, a creature that refused its place on the menu. From there, the story moves like a slow heartbeat. Thump, pause, thump. People making traps out of sticks and vines. People shaping stones to cut deeper, throw farther. People following herds not because they feared them, but because they planned to eat them. And the predators, they began to disappear from some places. Not because humans killed them all, but because they learned to stay away. Still, humans remembered them. They carved them into bone, painted them on cave walls. Huge shapes, lions, bears, mammoths, rhinos, all mixed with handprints, as if to say, we were here too. The paintings weren't trophies, they were memories. You don't paint what you hate, you paint what you respect. Sometimes I wonder if those pictures were lullabies for grown-ups. Stories to remind everyone why the fire mattered, why you kept watch, why you stayed together. Even the children must have known the faces of danger before they could speak. They learned the roar, the hiss, the growl, like a second language. But bit by bit, fear turned into familiarity. The lions didn't rule the plains anymore. The people did, though they didn't feel like rulers. They just felt tired, hungry, alive. Then came a colder world. The ice crept down from the north, and with it came new beasts. Massive bears, saber-toothed cats fading into the snow, packs of wolves howling across the frozen valleys. To live in that time, you had to be clever or you vanished. So people learned to build shelters that held heat. They stitched furs together with bone needles. They stored food for months, something no other animal really did. And in doing that, they built the first outlines of home, a place where the wind couldn't reach, where you could sleep without waking to claws. It wasn't perfect, but it was a beginning. Imagine that first morning when no one had to look over their shoulder before eating. Just quiet breath and snow falling outside. That must have felt like paradise. Of course, paradise never lasts. Because once you've learned to feel safe, you start to dream again. You start to wonder what's beyond the hills, beyond the ice, beyond the next horizon. So they walked. They followed the rivers, crossed the tundra, sailed along strange coasts in little boats made of skin and bone. Everywhere they went, they met new eyes watching from the dark. Tigers in the east, jaguars in the west, crocodiles in the south. And each time they learned a new way to stay alive. It's almost funny when you think about it. For a species that was so fragile, so slow, so bare, we spread farther than anything else on Earth. The predators had teeth. We had time. We had memory that stretched farther than any jungle. Some nights, though, I think they still heard the old laughter of hyenas in their dreams. Even after they'd left the plains behind, that sound followed them. A reminder that somewhere, something was always waiting. Maybe that's why we light candles, why we build cities that never really sleep. We're still keeping the dark at arm's length, and so the long balance shifted. The hunters became rarer, the people became many, but the lessons stayed. Look before you drink, stay near the fire, sleep where others can see you, never trust silence. You can still feel those rules under everything we do. When someone locks a door or checks a shadow twice, that's the echo of the ancient grass moving. When a child hides under a blanket after hearing a sound at night, that's the oldest story we have, repeating itself. The strangest part is how much those old fears gave us. Fire, shelter, tools, friendship, maybe even kindness. Because the ones who cared for each other lived longer. The ones who shared food saw another sunrise. Fear didn't just make us cautious, it made us gentle. By the time the last saber-tooth was gone, by the time the great bears retreated to the edge of the world, humans were everywhere. We had become what we once feared. The eyes in the dark were ours now, but still. Sometimes, late at night when the wind moves just right, I think a part of us remembers. the hush before a pounce, the faint smell of something wild nearby. And a tiny voice inside says, "Stay close to the fire." When the ice began to melt again, the world filled with giants. Mammoths wandered in herds across the wide plains where the snow retreated. Huge, shaggy shapes moving slow as clouds, tusks curling like frozen rivers. There were great bison too, and elk with antlers like trees, and heavy-footed woolly rhinoceroses. And behind them, always at a distance, came the humans. They didn't follow out of courage exactly. They followed because the herds meant food and hides and bone for tools. Every part of those animals could be used. Even the fat burned like oil in a lamp, so people watched, waited, whispered plans. They learned how the herds moved with the seasons, where they crossed the rivers, how long the calves stayed close to their mothers, and when everything was right, the wind, the angle of the sun, they acted. It must have been terrifying to stand in front of something taller than a house, knowing that if you missed you'd be crushed. But somehow, again and again, they tried. Spears thrown, voices shouting, a line of bodies moving together. The animals turned, stumbled, fell. And each time a hunt succeeded, the people's confidence grew a little more. The world that had once hunted them was now their larder. That was the strange thing about us. We never stopped being afraid, but we stopped letting fear decide what we could do. Courage wasn't the absence of fear, it was walking with it hand in hand. The great predators still existed, of course. Lions and wolves shadowed the herds too, waiting for their chance. Sometimes humans and lions came face to face over the same kill. You can almost feel the tension of that moment. The smell of blood, the cold air, the stillness before someone made the first move. Sometimes the lions won, sometimes the people did. Each encounter was another small shift in the balance of power. As the ages passed, humans began to make weapons from more than stone. Bone tips hardened in fire, shafts straightened and balanced. They invented throwing sticks, then atlatls, then bows. Each invention widened the distance between themselves and danger. No longer did they have to wait for a predator to come close. They could strike first. And so the story turned another quiet corner. Predators became fewer, the herds smaller, and the humans more numerous. Villages began to appear in the places where herds had once passed. The first fences, the first real homes. And for the first time, children could be born in the same place their parents had lived. Still, even in those new homes, fear was never completely gone. They built fires at the edge of the camp, not in the middle. They placed sharp sticks around the sleeping places. They told stories before sleep. Stories about the ones who still roamed outside, because the old memory was alive in them. It had to be. Sometimes, on very dark nights, the people heard the howl of wolves drifting over the plain. The sound didn't just mean danger, it meant distance, wildness, freedom, and maybe a part of every listener felt both fear and envy. Because deep down, humans remembered what it was like to live by the night and the hunt. Little by little, though, the lines blurred again. Some wolves came closer to campfires, scavenging scraps, curious but cautious. And humans, tired of loneliness, began to feed them. No one planned it. It just happened. A quiet exchange of trust between two creatures that had once been enemies. Over generations, those wolves changed. Their eyes softened, their bodies shrank a little, their teeth grew smaller. They became dogs. It's a lovely thing when you think about it. The most dangerous predator humans ever faced gave rise indirectly to our oldest friend. Because dogs were the answer to the dark. They could hear what we couldn't. They could smell what we missed. And when danger came, they gave warning. The night was still full of threats, but now humans had allies. I like to imagine one of those early camps, a ring of huts made from bone and hide, smoke curling up to the stars, a few dogs lying close to the fire, twitching in their sleep. Beyond the light, the world still restless, shadows moving, predators pacing. But the people slept anyway, trusting that if something came too near, they'd know. That trust was new. It meant that for the first time in history, another creature was watching the darkness for us. It meant humans could dream longer, and dreaming Real dreaming leads to new ideas. The hunters who dreamed began to shape their tools with care, to decorate them, to make them beautiful. They sang while they worked, told stories while they waited for the herds to move. Even the act of fear itself became art. Carved fangs, painted claws, songs about the great cats. By giving fear a shape, they controlled it. But not all dreams were gentle. As safety grew, so did ambition. People started hunting more than they needed. They built traps big enough for dozens of animals at once. They chased whole herds over cliffs, leaving carcasses they couldn't even eat. Maybe it was hunger, or pride, or simply the joy of knowing they could. Either way, the world began to thin. The big predators suffered first. Lions vanished from some places, bears from others. The great cats of the north slipped quietly into legend. Without predators, the balance wavered. The herds grew too large, then starved. The land changed again, and through it all humans kept moving, building, inventing. Fire turned into clay, clay into pottery, stone into metal. They planted seeds and called it farming. They built walls and called it safety. They looked at the empty hills where lions once lay and called it progress. But sometimes, in the stories they told their children, the old predators still walked. Dragons, monsters, spirits in the dark. Maybe those were memories, reshaped by time. A way to keep the lesson alive, that safety is never permanent and the night always listens. Even now, thousands of years later, we still decorate our homes with little pieces of that story. We paint cats on pottery, wear necklaces of teeth, carve wolves into stone. We keep small fires, the electric kind, burning through the night. We say it's for comfort, but maybe it's really to keep the oldest memory quiet. Sometimes I think the most dangerous predator humans ever faced never truly disappeared. It just moved inside our heads, living there as instinct. Every time you check a lock, glance over your shoulder, or turn on a light before walking down a hall, that's the old world whispering, the grass moving, the eyes waiting. But that whisper isn't just fear. It's also the reason we built everything, the reason we watch over each other, the reason we tell stories like this one. And so, over thousands of years, the world continued to change. The predators that had once ruled the plains and forests grew smaller in number, retreating to shadows, leaving humans with more space, more choice, more power. But even as the danger receded, the memory of it never truly left. We carry it still in ways we hardly notice, in the way we check the locks at night, in the way we glance out the window when a branch cracks, in the way we feel a shiver when something is just off. It's not fear exactly. It's a rhythm our ancestors wrote into our bones, a rhythm that says be cautious, pay attention, survive. And yet that same memory gave us something else: foresight, creativity, the ability to imagine what hadn't yet happened. We became planners, inventors, caregivers. The world that once hunted us shaped the very parts of ourselves that now allow us to create. Fire, clothing, tools, shelter, friendship, language, all gifts from the predators we learned to live alongside. It's strange to think about. The most dangerous predator we ever faced helped turn us into the species that would eventually dominate the world. Lions and wolves, crocodiles and bears, saber-toothed cats. They were the teachers, we were the students, and in learning from them, we discovered patience, cunning, and cooperation. Sometimes I imagine what it would feel like to return to those ancient plains, the wind on your skin, the scent of grass and wet earth, the distant eyes glinting in the shadows. The fire in your hands would feel like a miracle. Every breath would be precious, every heartbeat loud and certain. The silence would hum with danger, and somehow, even knowing all that, you would not run. You would watch, you would think, you would survive. That's the lesson we've carried ever since, that the world is dangerous, that life is fleeting, that survival requires more than strength. It requires attention, imagination, and the quiet courage to keep moving forward even when the night is full of teeth and claws. We tell ourselves stories even now of bravery, of monsters, of things that stalk the edges of our vision. Because the ancient memory is still alive. It's why we look both ways before crossing the street, why we check on our children, why we pause before stepping into the dark. It's why we build, why we create, why we tell each other tales of wonder and fear. And in a way, that memory is a gift we earned by surviving, by listening, by learning from those who were once stronger than us, faster than us, hungrier than us. The predators that hunted humans taught humans how to live, and in learning we turned the tables. Today we walk through cities instead of grasslands, sleep behind doors instead of under trees, and carry devices instead of spears. But the pulse of that ancient world still beats quietly in us. The same instincts that kept us alive in the shadows still guide us in the noise of modern life. So when you hear the distant growl of a dog in the street or the sudden rustle of wind through the trees, perhaps you can feel it too. The echo of the plains, the forests, the rivers where our ancestors first learned to fear and then to prevail. It's a long, strange history, isn't it? One where the hunted became the hunter, where fear became wisdom, where survival became creativity, and where the most dangerous predator we ever faced taught us what it meant to be human. And as you settle down tonight, perhaps you'll remember the shadows, the fire, the quiet watchers. Perhaps you'll remember that even in the dark there is a way to live, that even in the silence there is knowledge. And maybe, just maybe, that memory will help you dream safely. You've been listening to Sleepless History.